the court had both good and bad decisions in just those 3 cases. And so the court for a long time was often seen as sort of the ultimate protector of Native American rights against sort of the plenary power of Congress. Because Congress, for the longest time, held very little interest in Native American rights. They were constantly curtailing. And then in more recent years, you sort of see a bit more balance between it. There are times that Congress and the executive are very respectful of Native American rights and do quite a bit to sort of carve out space for Native American treaty rights, and then Congress sort of goes the opposite direction. And so they're not always balanced that way, but it's a very complicated history that the courts have with Native American rights and sovereignty. That's why when it comes to the case law, a lot of times, you have decisions going back and forth. In this particular instance, if you just look at the Native American environmental law, you can see sort of how this court is heading in some ways. But then there's clear treaty language, like I said, that complicates all of that sort of precedent. So.
That's how the law is. It's always messy.
Sure. Yes. I imagine.
Because it's always just humans fighting over things and trying to work it their ways.
Sure. And it's how we construct it, too. It's based on a very we make law based on, or precedents based off of singular cases that we then draw upon, over time. So, and then it gets narrowed, expanded, all of those sorts of things. So that's always kind of nice.
So you're suggesting it's inconclusive. What finally happened? Did they get to be the way?
No, that's a good question. I didn't get to that at the end. It's been put on hold.
It's still on hold.
Yeah, it's still on hold. The decision of Anderson said that they could not resume the hunt. At least as sponsored through the federal government. Now, technically, there's a question that remains as to whether individual families could hunt. And the court didn't seem to really address that. And so there were attempts by certain families to hire, professionals and form their own sort of hunting crews. And I know that one group went on a hunt. I don't think they were successful, and it was ridiculously expensive. They couldn't afford to do it. It was thousands and thousands of dollars. And so I think they made one effort at it and gave up. And then they petitioned several times for the Supreme Court to take up the case. The Supreme Court has not. So it's just that.
In Pennsylvania, they can't hunt.
They cannot hunt. Yeah, the hunt is frozen until a higher court does something, or they can go back and meet some of the requirements of Anderson. Like Anderson, it's interesting too, Anderson doesn't conclusively say whaling's bad. It's just saying that they need better evidence to sort of say that it would not cause harm. But it's hard to say that no matter what evidence that they brought forward, that it would ever be enough to resolve any questions that might remain. So,
Michael? If it's true that whiteness, like you're saying, only finds its way into court decisions based on little logics and ways of representation, so it's sort of like a secondary or synthetic thing, informing the decision but maybe not driving it.
Sure.
Then how is it that we apply it so unequally in terms of doctrine to where we have things like exemptions for inspections of oil drilling rigs, say, in the Gulf Coast, and almost no ability to impose regulations on global warming standards, even though the burden of proof is actually in the opposite direction as far as presumption. There's more proof than not that what we're doing is damaging, as opposed to, it seems like what evidence they had in the whaling decision, that there's just not enough evidence to prove that we're not doing harm. It seems sort of like that's more indicative of a primary goal, we actually have a separate set of legal techniques that we use to apply to white and non-white bodies when they present themselves to the court. So I was just wondering, is there any where's the line between how these different kinds of strong precautionary principles are applied to natives and then not at all in the other direction?
There could be a case, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of criticism that goes along that route of that it's the driving force in sort of unequal application of law. I don't mean to say that that's not the case in some instances and that analysis would be wrong. Just in this instance, there wasn't a lot of evidence, because when you look at even prior Ninth Court decisions, sometimes they side with Native American groups on kind of similar questions. Sometimes they don't. There's no. So it's hard to say that it's a driving force, because, like I say, when I initially did my analysis of the decision, I just did it as a legal analysis. And I tried to read the case a couple different ways, and it just didn't make any sense from a legal perspective. And it also didn't make sense from sort of a whiteness or racism or colonialism as a driving force, because, they don't come out and make a strong decision. They don't even say that it's wrong. They just say, we don't know. So let's just put it on hold.
So it almost seems like the perfect storm, where you have all of these sort of like cultural discourses and imaginaries that happen to overlap in one like meta-narrative.
And one is a pretty powerful one. Like Moby Dick's a fairly powerful one in that mix, and I say that that's what they draw upon to help sort out the mess somewhat. At least the way that it seems to operate.
It gives them sort of like a comforting like discourse to draw their decision.
Yeah, or it acts like precedent.
Right.
In many ways. We know what has happened if we allow whaling, because the story of Moby Dick tells us.
Right, it's almost like common law, except
in a way, except it's literature rather than being prior decision or.
This is a side issue, but the quote that the opinion began with, as I swallow life, the great whale's body may have been a real terror to its foes. In its death, its ghost becomes a powerless panic to a world. A powerless panic, to me, seems to be an oxymoron. And that seems to me to be like perhaps a encapsulation of terrorism. But
which Moby Dick's been drawn upon as well.
has it? Okay, that was another question.
Oh, yeah. 9/11 and sort of the wake of it. I want to say it's a fairly big scholar. I think it was Said that used it in a piece in response to 9/11. He draws upon Moby Dick. I want to say it was in the London Book Review. I think he had that piece. And so, but yeah, it's been written both ways. It's been alluded to both ways. As sort of American exceptionalism, arrogance, as Said's sort of take on it, and then there's been other takes as sort of cautionary that if we failure to act, there's some allusions to it as well. So yeah, it's come up in sort of modern, the interesting thing, there's been one of the books that I reference, I don't remember the author's name offhand, the argument of his book was that anytime that there's a crisis in American identity and sort of like American cultural imagination, Moby Dick is called forth. Yeah. And so that's
comes to the rest of them.
Sure. Yeah. That's why I make the argument that Moby Dick here is not just. It's a great piece of literature in and of itself, but it's a very powerful American, cultural force beyond that.
And I have one factual question.
Okay.
In the description in the funeral of the carcass floating, and whales weigh I don't know how many thousands of tons. They apparently took what they needed and left the rest. And they wanted the ribs for corsets and the oil, and that was the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
Would the Indians, would the Macaws be taking the whole whale and cut it using every part?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, they would. It's a fairly long ceremony, actually. They bring the whale to the beach. It's not out in the water. They take every piece of meat that's usable, and then what isn't, if it can be processed into oils. Anything. They very much believe that every part of the whale is in use. Like I mentioned earlier, the Thunderbird symbol.
We don't just strip what they want to do.
Yeah, no. But environmentalists have a big debate about it. That's their religious symbol, and Thunderbird that brought the whale to them in a time of need. And so, they don't just strip off a few parts and then discard the carcass.